Well, hey guys, my name is Ben Oje, and I'm the lead pastor here. I am a February baby, which means that when I was in high school, all my friends who were born in September through January, they all got their licenses before me, which means that I spent a lot of time as a passenger in a car with a lot of dangerous drivers because all my friends were driving before me. And so there's a game we'd play where we would see if we could get from our starting point to our destination without going under 20 miles an hour. You might not think that's very fast, but when you're taking a 90-degree turn, it is quite fast. Don't try it on the way home. You will spill your coffee, you will spill whatever you got in the car, because that is quite fast. To get all the way without going under 20 is crazy. So one time we're driving down the hill toward the beach, and we're coming up on this T intersection, the kind of intersection where it has a reflective orange sign, like do not keep driving, you will be in someone's front yard. Turn right, turn left. So it's me in the passenger seat, my friend Andy's Toyota Tercel, and 3 crazy friends in the back. And Andy looks over at us with a crazy look in his eye and says, "How fast do you think I can take this turn?" In the back seat, I just hear 22, 25, 30, and I'm in the death seat. So I'm like, 30, no, under 20, don't. I am in the death seat, passenger seat. So what Andy does is he's going probably 25. He turns the wheel, and when you're going 25 and you turn the wheel might turn, the wheels will turn, but the car won't turn. The car just skids straight, and it ends up skidding up on this big rock, kind of like a turtle turned upside down. And it didn't hurt or anything, but I was scared. I was traumatized. I'm like, what were you thinking? I'm just with these terrible drivers all through my traumatized 16-year-old teenage year of sophomore year. And from then on, I don't trust you guys. And it's not your fault. I don't trust you when you're driving. If I'm in the passenger seat, I'd trust none of you because I just don't know if you're going to do something crazy like Andy did. And now I'm traumatized by these terrible drivers all throughout my teenage years. And then this other time, I was driving, and I was 17, and I was driving in Ballard in Seattle. You know Ballard? Anyone who knows Ballard knows where this story is going because they're terrible drivers. So I had a yellow light. I was going straight. And what do you do when you have a yellow light going straight? You gun it, right? You got to get through the light. Well, you see, the person opposite of me, coming the opposite direction, she had a yellow light as well, and she gunned it, except she turned left in front of me to try to make the light. And I T-boned her, totaled my car, totaled her car, and it was just smashed. And the other driver, she was 17, come to find out. She had 4 other friends in her car. She was distracted too. They were doing stupid things. And I was lucky not to be hurt. But now I'm terrified. I'm terrified to share the road with you guys. I don't trust you behind the wheel. I don't trust you behind your own wheel when I'm on the road. I don't trust people when they're driving. You see, even if I have the right of way, I'll be speeding on these country roads, and I see a car come up to the stop sign coming perpendicular, and I don't think they're going to stop. I cover my horn. I cover the brake, like, you better stop. And I'll be going through a yellow light. You know, I'm gunning it through a yellow light, or even a green light, and someone's coming opposite of me with their blinker on. I'm like, they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. They're starting to turn their wheel. I'm scared. And you might be saying, "Hey, Ben, how about not speeding through yellow lights?" And I might say, "Hey, shut up." But hey, the point is, I have trauma because now I don't trust anyone. Now I have this reaction, this anxiety when people are driving and I'm in the car, I'm a pastor. When other people are driving and I'm not even safe in my own car, I sweat it out. And that's what it looks like. That's what trauma looks like. And some people think that trauma is the event, the crash, or that thing that happened. But really, that's not the trauma. The trauma is the reaction to the event. And it's that weird anxiety I feel, that distrust, that distress I feel when I'm behind the wheel and other people are driving, or when you're behind the wheel and I'm in your car. It's not your fault. It might not even be my fault, but that's the trauma that I carry. Now, my trauma is mild, that trauma. I have other trauma, but this one I'm telling you is mild. I just share it with you as an example of what it looks like. But there are different kinds of trauma that we face, that we all have. And some of it's minor and kind of funny like mine, but some of it's serious. Some of it is really heavy, and we wear it every day, and we don't even realize that the reactions we have, that the things we do in life is as a result of these traumas that we're carrying. And so maybe you have serious trauma as a result of some physical events in your life. You went through poverty. You had a bad case of COVID-19 or some other illness. You almost died in a car crash. Maybe you were abused. You were beat up. Whatever it was, that's categorized as a physical kind of trauma that now you have and you carry. You wear that. Many of you have a serious trauma as a result of some emotional events. Maybe you had a messy breakup or a divorce. Someone cheated on you. Maybe someone yelled at you, cut you down, insulted you. Maybe it was a parent. I don't know. But that left an emotional scar on you that now is a trauma in your life. And the more and more we learn about trauma, the experts, they're talking about spiritual abuse and spiritual trauma. Maybe you had parents, pastors, elders, a priest, who knows? But they said something awful, and now that left a spiritual trauma, a mark on you. And some of you are overcoming a lot of spiritual trauma today. I just want to recognize you for coming to this church. Some of you come to church like, I've never been to church before, but some of you come out of some pretty rotten situations, spiritual abuse, spiritual trauma. I just want to recognize you and say, you're in the right place. And we're here to deal with that today, right? Are we here to deal with some trauma today? You guys are overcoming a lot even by being here. I just want to recognize that. There's a category called acute trauma. Some of us have this where it's our response to a very traumatic one-time event. Maybe it's a complicated birth or a miscarriage. Maybe you were date raped. Maybe you got robbed. Maybe you overdosed. We're going to get real today, right? I told you. Is it okay if we get real in this church? Things happen. They're really crappy, but we call that acute trauma. Some of us have what's called chronic trauma. It's a long-term response to some long-term events repeated over time. You were bullied in school. You lived with racism. You were abused sexually. You had a mom or dad. Maybe they were an alcoholic. Maybe you were exposed to pornography at a young age. You had a reaction to that. You kept going back to that. That is a chronic trauma in your life, that now you have this addictive personality around it. Some of us have what's called a complex trauma, and this is where it's a bit of everything we've talked about. It's exposure to chronic abuse. It's an unstable relationship or series of those. It's a few big traumatic events sprinkled in there, some of it emotional, some of it physical, some of it spiritual. And so a lot of us are walking around wounded. We are wounded from trauma, and it's complex. And we think we've gotten through it, and maybe we've gotten through the event, but we haven't gotten through the effects of the event or the chronic trauma. And what you see is this intact person, but what can't be seen is a person that is living with a lot of pain and trauma and reactions that we can't even explain or understand. And the hurt from trauma, I want you to see that it takes longer. And in a way, it's way more damaging than the event itself. It just takes so much longer to heal from and to recognize that a lot of times the trauma we carry is worse than the event itself, right? And so you might find it difficult to trust people. Maybe you find it difficult to trust people around your kids, and then that's just a trauma that you wear. And you might find it difficult to trust a new environment because you can't control the outcome. And if you can't control the outcome, if you can't prevent what happened to you before, now you don't trust new situations, new people, new things. That's a result of trauma. You might find it difficult to trust God. It feels like he let you down. Maybe it was you felt like when you went through that event that it was his fault or he could have prevented it. So now you're mad at him and it's affecting your relationship with God, this trauma that you went through. And I hope you have the courage to admit it today. To admit, I have trauma. I have events in my life that I've been through. And now I carry some pain, some trauma, some things with me, and it's having, if you could admit that this might have a real effect on your personal relationships and have a real effect on the outcomes of your life. It might have a real effect on your relationship with God. I want you to start to admit that today, because when you don't deal with this, it really comes out in some different ways, some weird ways, and some ways that just aren't healthy, and other people deal with that, and you deal with that, and that's just not where we want to be, even in our walk with God. And so, let me tell you this: is that the trauma you bear, it's not your fault. Okay, I don't want you to hear that this is your fault, but the thing is, you carry it. you carry it, and even though it wasn't your fault, you didn't give this to yourself, it was given to you probably by someone else, but now it is your responsibility. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to heal from the trauma. So what are we going to do with this responsibility? We're going to do something about it. We're going to get real with it. We're going to heal from trauma today. Let's talk about it. Talking about trauma, that's our topic. It's part of a series we're doing called Peace of Mind. And we're doing this series because we want to be Christians who don't just pretend everything's all right. We're just going to pretend we're over it, pretend it's done and gone. Well, no, we're going to attend to what's going on in our minds. We're not Christians who pretend. We're Christians who attend what's going on in our minds. And so let me reiterate that this is a complex subject. I am not an expert. I am a spiritual expert. We're going to approach this from a spiritual way. We're going to touch on some emotional, physical, clinical terminology and realities. And I just want to acknowledge that you might find the healing you need simply from a spiritual expert, spiritual talk from God, from the Bible. All of this might culminate in real healing from trauma. It might be that you try this and you need further expertise from a physical expert, an emotional expert. And so if you need to seek that out, please do so. Because we learned a few weeks ago that getting help is not weakness, it's wisdom, yeah. And so we created this webpage on our site. It's called NewSpirit.Church/mental health. That is a starting point for you. Great Bible studies, great resources, and we even have some great advice on there from a counselor about how to find a counselor and keep them. And so please visit that if you need further resources. A couple weeks ago, we talked about anxiety, and we said if it's big enough to worry about, it's also big enough to pray about. And then we talked last week about depression. With God, there's hope. With God, there's hope for depression. Today, we're talking about trauma. Remember, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And so how do we do this? How do we heal from trauma? First, we're going to process the pain with people. Number two, we're going to press in, prayerfully press into God with the trauma. Number three, we're going to pursue purpose in what we've been through. Pursue purpose in the trauma. The bottom line is that with trauma, you don't just get over it, you heal from it. Let me say it again. You don't just get over it, you heal from it. That's something we have to be active about. And today we're going to look at the scriptures to see how Paul did this. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Acts chapter 9. We'll read it together. If you don't, it'll be on the screen. But listen, I've been through biblical courses in college. I've been through master's level training, seminary degree, all kinds of Bible knowledge, Bible courses. And it wasn't until this week that I learned and realized that the life of Paul, in the New Testament, Paul was traumatized. I never thought of it that way. This guy had major trauma. The man who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament had trauma. The man who planted dozens of churches around the Mediterranean, trauma all over his life. He suffered acute trauma, chronic trauma, complex trauma. They didn't have that terminology back then, but now we can go back and look, yeah, you were really dealing with that, weren't you? And I want you to see how Paul didn't just stuff it. He didn't just get over it. He took responsibility for healing from trauma. And I want you to see how God made him stronger. The trauma didn't just weaken him, it made him stronger as a result of what he'd been through. And so let's look at how that happened. We're going to start in Acts chapter 9. And this is the story of Saul's conversion. Before he was called Paul, he was called Saul. So here it goes. Starting in verse 1, it says, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, that's Christianity, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. Isn't that kind of him to think of men and women as equals in the persecution? That's so very progressive. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? We'll stop there. And we see that this trauma begins with conversion to Christ. His conversion story is a traumatic story. And I want you to imagine you're riding a horse and a lightning strikes right next to you, and you wouldn't even see the lightning. You wouldn't even realize it's lightning. All you would see is light, and then boom, you'd fall backwards, and that impact of the lightning striking right next to you would knock you back off your horse. You would hear just an explosion. You would see nothing but white. And I'm not saying Paul was hit by lightning, but I'm saying what he experienced here was like getting hit with lightning. The results were the same thing. And what would you have if you almost got hit by lightning? Trauma. Yeah, you would. You would absolutely have some PTSD there. And here's what else happens. He hears a voice. And the voice doesn't say, "Hello, my servant Saul. Thine has been chosen to speak thou gospel to the world." The voice says, "Saul, why are you persecuting me?" So not only you knock back lightning, "Saul, what are you doing this for?" It's booming. You're like, "Whoa, God, I'm so sorry." Now you have emotional damage, right? On top of the physical damage, you have emotional trauma. Just imagine. And you see, when I converted to Christ, I looked out the window and the sun was kind of setting. It was by the beach, and the sound I heard was "Shout to the Lord" by Hillsong. Do you guys remember that one? It was a very nice setting. I have positive vibes when I think about my conversion experience. What about you? Do you have some positive vibes with that moment, that occasion? Paul doesn't. Okay, his is traumatic. Like, what was that? I have PTSD just thinking about that voice. I felt so guilty, and he was blind. He was blind. Imagine you're struck blind. You don't know when you're going to, and you're just left to walk to Damascus. You don't even know if you're going to see again. You don't know that 3 days later this is going to get healed. You don't know that. You're just left with trauma. You're scared. What just happened? That was Saul's conversion experience. I want to show you how Saul healed from his trauma. The first thing he did was process the pain with other people. He processed it. After his conversion experience, he went from city to city, town to town, planting churches. And it wasn't just a conversion experience, it was all these other experiences. He was on mission, but trauma after trauma after trauma, city after city. He was being kicked out and chased, running for his life, insulted, all kinds of things. And I want you to see he didn't just get over it, he talked about it. And some of us were raised in a generation where we don't talk about it, we just rub some dirt on it. Did anyone ever tell you that? Yeah. Rub some dirt on it. Did anyone ever say this to you? Suck it up, buttercup. Yeah. It's true because it rhymes, right? Yeah. And here's another one. Get your act together. But my family, we didn't say act. Is that true in your family? We said something else, didn't we? Get it together. We don't just heal from the pain by ignoring it, though. Did that work? It didn't work. We didn't heal from it by suppressing it. And so we start to heal the pain when we process it with people. And so we say things like, "I was betrayed. Guys, I was betrayed. Guys, I was abused. I was raped." You got to say it. You got to speak it. You got to speak it with someone. Get it out there. You start processing when you say it, and you process it with people. And there's some people today who think that everything is abuse. I don't want you to hear that today, because just because you got in trouble at work, or just because someone called you out or disagreed with you, that is not abuse. That is not necessarily trauma. But on the other hand, some people today think that nothing is abuse. And if that's you, you might simply need to admit it, that what you went through, what happened, that you carry trauma from that. And you need to start processing that with people. If you think that nothing is abuse, nothing is trauma, that's just not true. And you got to understand that we don't heal from that in isolation. We do that in community. That is what we're called to do as Christians. And see how in 2 Corinthians 11, Paul processes his trauma in community. We're going to look at 2 Corinthians 11:23, and we'll start there. Paul's saying, "Are they servants of Christ? I am out of my mind to talk like this. I am more. I have worked so much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again." You can start seeing he's listing out the traumatic events. And you might feel like, as you start saying this, am I crazy to be talking like this? I was raised in a generation where we don't do this. And that's what he's saying. I feel like I'm out of my mind saying this. But you might feel like that too. Just keep going, because watch what he says. 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes minus 1. Pausing there, the reason they would whip someone 39 times is because if you whip them over 40 times, legally that counts as abuse and they can get you in trouble. But 39 times technically wasn't abuse in the eyes of the law. I'm going to venture a guess to say it's still traumatic getting whipped 39 times, especially on 5 different occasions. Now we're talking chronic abuse and trauma, right? Let's keep going. He's listing it out. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. This is all up until this point, by the way. I spent a night and day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in the danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have gone without food. I have been cold and naked. And see here how he's processing these traumatic events, processing the pain with people by talking about it. He's listing what's been done to him. And maybe you've never spoken some things to some people. You've told them the mild, funny things like the crazy car rides, but you got to start speaking the big, heavy stuff like Paul's doing here. And I just got to tell you, you're in the right place for that today. This is not a place where we hide from things. It's a place where we process with people. These are the right people to do that with. I will really want to encourage you to get in a group even this Friday, because I'm watching people process their pain with other people. They're getting real. They're healing from it, and they're taking responsibility for what's been given to them. I'm watching it week over week, and they're finding healing, and I want that for all of us. And so please, find healing in community. Look at 2 Corinthians 1:8. It says, we were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. And so you can see in this verse that Paul, after he's done describing the events of what happened, now he's describing the feelings. And I want you to see how he doesn't just prioritize protection. Some of us are about protection. I got to protect myself. I'm not going to say anything to anyone because that hurts. And what he's prioritizing instead of protection is connection. You're going to do that too. Prioritize connection, not protection. Get in a group. See a counselor. Do what he did by processing the pain with other people. You are not too old school for this. You are not too manly for this. You are not too tough for this. You are not tougher than Paul, right? He was tough, and here he is doing this. That means you can do it too. Let's look at number 2. How do I heal from trauma? We're going to prayerfully press into God. Yeah, so you're going to talk to people. You're also going to talk to God. You're going to cry out. You're going to complain if you have to. This is what people in the Bible did. This is what you can do as well. Look at 2 Corinthians 12. Watch how Paul does this. He describes that he has this thorn in his side, and we're not exactly sure what that thorn means or what it is. It's probably not a literal thorn. That's easily solved. But it's a metaphor for something that's going on. Maybe it's an enemy in his life. Maybe it's a chronic pain, a disease, something that he's dealing with long term. I want you to raise your hand if you have a thorn in your side, something you're dealing with long term, over time. It's always there. And if that thorn is the person sitting next to you, don't look at him. Just give me a wink. Give me a wink. I see that wink. Thank you. We're getting real today, right? Sometimes it's the person. We see that Paul presses into God with this thorn in his side issue. Here's what he says in chapter 12, verse 8. He says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord, take it away from me. 3 times I pleaded. And maybe you tried that and it didn't work. I pleaded with God, it didn't work. But here he does it 3 times. And the people who exegete this verse, they say it probably wasn't just 3 times in an hour. It was probably 3 different seasons of crying out to the Lord about this pain in his side. And so I want you to try that. Yeah, you already tried it once. Did you try it twice? Did you try it in this season? Did you try it a 3rd time? Because it's okay to keep crying out. Press into God with the pain. Say, God, this wasn't fair. Why did that happen? God, this sucks. You can say that. It sucks. God, he can handle that pain as you process that with him. You can say, God, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to feel better. I don't have any answers. I just want you to deal with this. So unload on him And if you've already done that, do it a second time. Do it a third time. Listen to what Paul heard back from God in the next verse, verse 9. It says, "But God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Wow. In other words, he's saying, in your weakness, I'm strong. God's saying, when you're weak, I'm strong. He says the trauma and the pain, you see, that took something from you. The trauma might have taken something from you, but it didn't take his grace from you. Do you hear me today? That's good news. Someone took something from you a long time ago, but they did not take his grace from you. Praise be to God. And so let his grace be sufficient for you in your pain. And I want you to say that. Will you just say that right now? Just say, God's grace is sufficient for me. Say it. And Paul pressed into prayer, and he said, take it away. Take it away, God. And God pressed back with his promise. My grace is sufficient. You press in with pain and prayer, take it away. God presses back. Here's my promise. My grace is sufficient for you. I'm strong when you're weak. Here's my word for you today. Here's my comfort for you. And he's going to do that to you. So press into him. Let him press back with his promise. You're going to say, heal the pain. Take it away. Make me whole. He's going to press back. I am close to you. I am close to the brokenhearted. I save those who are crushed in spirit. He's going to say to you, no weapon formed against you will prosper. He's going to say to you, you are more than a conqueror. He speaks back his promises to you when you speak your pain to him. And so we process the pain with people. We prayerfully press into God. And then how do we heal from trauma? We pursue purpose in it. This is going to be a hard one to stomach for some of us because we're still in the pain. We're still pressing into God. We're still processing with people. We still feel it. And so this third point, you might not be ready for it. And if that's true for you, just bookmark this for later. Or if you're watching online, just pause it here. Come back to it in a week or two. But this is the hardest one because there comes a point when you just got to pursue the purpose in the pain. You got to find the beauty in the ashes. You got to discover that the trauma wasn't a setback in your life. It was a set up for something different and something greater. And I'm not saying God planned for you to get hurt. I'm not saying it was his purpose for you to experience pain and trauma. But I'm saying that with God, the victim becomes the victor. And with God, you pursue purpose in the pain that you've been through. And he gives you a greater purpose for it. And he makes you stronger. And I want you to watch what Paul says after he goes to God about the thorn in his side. God speaks back, my grace is sufficient. We're going to keep reading that passage. And in verse 9, Paul's reflecting. He says, so now I'm glad to boast about my weakness, so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. This would have been crazy for him to say on that occasion where he was struck blind and hit with lightning and Jesus is yelling at him, to say, oh, I find purpose in this pain. No, that's just trauma. And you don't feel like saying that. You don't even have the capacity. But here he's writing years, maybe even a decade later, about he's finding purpose in the whippings and in the throwing rocks and in the running for his life. He's reflecting and he's seeing the greater purpose. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3, it says, praise be to the God, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. It would have been crazy for him in prison to say, God, thank you for this imprisonment. Or in the shipwreck as the Titanic's going, God, thank you for this shipwreck. What a great plan for my life. No, that's crazy talk. But when he reflects on that, he can see purpose in that pain and that event. And he says that now that I've been through this trauma and found comfort, God's put me in a unique position to comfort other people as they go through the same kinds of trauma. 10 years ago, my wife Jen and I, we conceived our second child, and we were hoping for a girl because we already had a boy, and you just want to round out that family. But honestly, we didn't care. We just wanted more kids. It didn't matter. We were just excited to conceive our second kid, and we started telling our family, started telling our close friends, And then at the end of the first trimester, Jen miscarried. And that hurt. That was one of the darkest days of my life. And what they don't tell you about miscarriage, if you're young, you've never been through this, is you're just left with, you actually have like a thing, like, is this a person? It's like a fetus. It kind of, if you look closely, it might have human features, but I kind of don't want to look at it. But you're just holding this like, this is painful, and what do I do? What do I do with this? It's like it's my kid, and like it feels wrong to throw it away. So we buried it. What I call it, we buried it in the yard. But then it's like, that's where I bury my pet. It doesn't feel right. It just hurts. Like, what do I do with this? God, what was the purpose of this? Why did we conceive? Why let us conceive just so we can hold this? What was your plan? What was your purpose there? This sucks. This hurts. Now I have to process with people and with you because we have a problem. There's no purpose. There's just pain here, and I don't see what the point was. I felt numb. I didn't want to move. It's one of the darkest moments, one of the darkest days of my life going through that. And if someone had told me, well, Ben, God works all things for good, or, God has a plan for this purpose, and I would have punched that person in the nose. 'Cause I don't want to hear it right now. Even if it was a woman, it's just, get out of here. Like, I don't discriminate either. It's just, I would have felt that reaction, Don't say that to me when I'm going through this. But now, it's been a long time. It's been years later. God comforted us. God brought us through that moment, through that pain, through that trauma. And I can't count the number of times that he's brought someone to me who's miscarried, who's lost a child. Maybe they can't conceive. And I just get to say, I feel that. I'm so sorry, but I've been there, and it does suck. I'm so sorry. And maybe God's plan for me in that purpose, the purpose of that pain, maybe the purpose was so that I can empathize with people now, so that I can sit with people and help them through that. And I'm not saying that God planned for me to, for us to have a miscarriage, that God's purpose was for us to lose children. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying that with God, we're not victims of this. We find victory, we find purpose, that this was a setup for something greater, so that now I can help carry others through this kind of loss, and that I can find empathy when I'm preaching to people, and I'm just not teaching and talking at people, but there's real empathy in what I've been through. And really what I see now is that there's a larger faith. That was a moment, that was a time where I got to depend on God and where I got to be enlarged. I'm not enlarged when times are good, I'm enlarged in times of distress. And so I want you to get to that point with your trauma. You don't just go through it, you grow through it. And I want you to find that purpose so that you can say, you know what, I grew through that and I'm growing through that. It's not just something that wounded me forever. Find the purpose, speak the purpose. Talk about how did that make you grow. Talk about how did you use that to help someone else. Talk about how did that force you to rely on God, to enlarge your faith, to grow you as a person. And in doing this, you will find healing. It will bring you healing when you pursue that purpose for the trauma that you went through. So what did we talk about today? Let's recap. We talked about trauma. We talked about the different kinds, and some of us, we're carrying around trauma. But some of us carry around a lot, some a little, but it hits us all in different ways and at different times, and it's complex, and we're all carrying it to some degree if we're willing to admit it. And while it's not your fault, hear me say that, it might not be your fault, but it is our responsibility to heal from it. What do? We process the pain with people. We prayerfully press into God. We pursue purpose in the trauma. The bottom line is that with trauma, you don't get over it. You heal from it. You don't just get over it. You heal from it. You have to know this, guys. You have to know that I love you more than you could possibly know. More than you can imagine, I love you. And that's why I need to push you in this moment, to push you toward Jesus. I'm not trying to draw you into me. I'm trying to draw you into Jesus. Can I get the lights turned down for this moment, guys? Thank you so much. Because I want to just give you an opportunity to connect with Jesus in this moment. If you have pain that you've been dealing with, unspoken trauma, the first thing I want to push you toward is Jesus. And I just want you to admit to him in this moment, Jesus, I need your help with this. God, I've been trying to deal with this on my own. God, I want this. I want you to have this. And if you're willing to let God have that trauma in your life, would you in faith just put your hand up And by putting your hand up, you're saying, God, this is yours. I want you to have it. This pain, this thing that I've been carrying is yours now. I give this to you in faith. I don't want it anymore. This in faith belongs to you now. And would you guys just give them a hand for doing that, for putting their, thank you. It takes faith to do something physical, to reflect something spiritual, and to really hand God that traumatic event or that trauma that you've been carrying, to really trust him with that takes so much faith. And I just want to push you to do that this morning. And so we're going to do one last song. And in this song, I want you to take a real step of faith. Prayerfully press into God. Process that with him. You know, we have the space up here. It's open for you guys to find the space to do that. And I invite you to use this space during this final song to prayerfully press in to God. Can I invite you guys to stand up? We're going to play this song in a moment. But before we do, I just want to leave you with this question. What's your next step? Just prayerfully consider that for 30 seconds. What's your next step in healing from trauma and growing in faith today? What is that step for you?